Hello. Thank you again for joining us this Thursday night. Welcome to our virtual town hall hosted by United Excel Social Justice Institute. The George Floyd murder in Minneapolis has again exposed failures of police reform. Across America, we see protests and more collective actions. Tonight, we want to discuss Kingdom Insight into Injustice in America, a response or reaction. I'm Christy Perry, Director of United Excel. United Excel is housed here in Baton Rouge at United Christian Faith Ministries. Our mission is to educate, advocate, and empower the Baton Rouge community and surrounding areas morally, economically, domestically, and socially, while promoting peace and justice around the world. We do this through 5 core areas: education, research, negotiation, confrontation, and resolution. We're calling you to join the Louisiana Faith Alliance for Change Saturday, June 6th at 12 o'clock noon. Join a league of ministers, business owners, attorneys, students, homeowners, and concerned citizens to demand real change. Join them at the state capitol on Saturday at 12 noon. We're looking for 1,000 men dressed in black. For more information, you may join our information list by texting LA Change to 225-250-1970. Again, join the Louisiana Faith Alliance for Change this Saturday, 12 o'clock noon. For more information, you may text LA Change to 225-250-1970. Tonight, we have a wonderful panel that will educate us on the ways we can become active in the social justice movement. Martin Luther King said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." Where do you stand tonight? We all have a role to play in bringing about justice. Tonight, our panel will discuss community policing, ways the church can get involved, ways you as a citizen can get involved, and the role of our youth. James Jefferson is here with us tonight. He will be our moderator tonight, and he's going to introduce our panelists. James?
Dr. Krista Perry, thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for making this organization relevant, and thank you for continuing to move us forward, okay? Before I get into the panelists, I would like to say something, a few words, if you will. Being a law enforcement officer in America, my heart goes out to the George Floyd family. Watching that video last week, it was extremely hard to make it through the entire thing. To watch a police officer take a knee on a man's neck for over 8 minutes is absolutely unacceptable, and he has to be held accountable. To have 3 other officers there and not stop that action is unacceptable, and they need to be held accountable. To the community, particularly to the young people, continue to protest and make your voice heard, because it's vital as it relates to this issue. But hear me closely. Please, please, please do it peacefully. Now, I understand, I get it. I share some of those emotions, some of those sentiments that you're feeling. When I get home and take my uniform off, I'm a black man in America raising 2 black boys. But to that end, I'm hopeful. I believe the best is yet to come. I believe on the other side of this civil unrest will be positive change. Positive change. I believe that 99.9% of the police officers do it right with a good heart. But I am hopeful that on the other side of this, that it will be better. For our panel, we have a phenomenal panel, a wealth of knowledge, starting with Ms. Christine Henderson. She's a senior collective healing strategist with Equal Justice USA. She is a grassroots organizer working with survivors of violence and trauma throughout previous throughout the nation, particularly here in Baton Rouge and in Florida. She also worked with the Southern Poverty Law Center to further advocate for the Southeast region. She was instrumental in building the case against an abusive juvenile justice facility that was ultimately closed down. Ms. Henderson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Next, we have one of my mentors, somebody that I've had an opportunity to follow from afar, Dr. Cedric Alexander. He's an author, he's a keynote speaker, he's a media expert, a law enforcement expert. With over 40 years of experience in public safety, he has appeared on national media networks to provide comment on police community relations, and as an CNN law enforcement analyst, has editorials including How to Build a Sensitive Cop, Police and Communities of Color Need to Build Trust, and Attacks on Police or Attack on Our Community. He also has served as the Deputy Commissioner of the New York State Division of Criminal Justice and as an assistant professor at Rochester University. He's the past national president of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executive Noble. He has lectured on police stress and burnout and currently trains in topics of management, leadership, centered around 21st century policing. In 2015, January 2015, by executive order, he was appointed by President Barack Obama to the 21st Century Task Force on Policing. Dr. Alexander, welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Last but not least, we have our founder, our leader, our pastor, Pastor Mark Ellis. He's an inspired leader, songwriter, musician, business practitioner, pastor, evangelist, who has extensively traveled the nation sharing God's word with people of all races and backgrounds. Pastor Ellis graduated from the University of Southern Mississippi with a major in business administration, Columbia University of New York, and Darden Business School of Virginia with executive MBA certificates. He accepted his call to minister in 1996 and was ordained as an elder in 2000. Pastor Ellis founded United Christian Faith Ministries in 2001 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and under his leadership, the church has grown to over 2,000 members with over 30 active ministries and continues to progress in excellence in Christian discipleship, global missions, and community outreach. He has 20 plus years in sales and marketing as a U.S. Vice President of Operations at Pitney Bowes, which is a Fortune 500 company, essentially saying he has a lot of money. Pastor Ellis has served on one of the nation's most prominent civil rights advocacy organization, Rainbow Push Coalition, as the Chief Operating Officer in 2016. He's married to Lady Mary Ellis, and they have 4 kids. Pastor Ellis.
Thank you, man. What a joy to be here with this distinguished panel. And James, I applaud your leadership as well as Dr. Christy Perry. So I'm glad to be here to just share some insights and listen and learn tonight as well.
Well, we're going to get right to it. I think we got about 50 minutes, so we got to put a quarter in the paint, as you say, Pastor Ellis. Dr. Alexander, you was appointed to President Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force in 2015. And through that work, we've attempted to close the gap as it relates to police and community relations. We've seen across the nation where members of the community has had the chance to sit down and talk with local leaders, local mayors and police chiefs, and put in enormous amount of work to try to close that gap. But as I sit back and look at what's happening around the nation, I can only ask, have we made any progress? Have we done anything that's putting us in the right direction? Because what I see now has me questioning what we've been doing the last 5 to 6 years. Can you speak to that?
Yes, sir. So, and again, thank you very much for having me. So if we put it in a historical context, as we all know, people of color in this country have for a long time been troubled with issues around building relationships and with police. That is a long-standing history. But let's bring it up to the 20th century, or the 21st century, I should say. If we all recall, Michael Brown on August 9th, 2014 was a tipping point in this country, a tipping point among many previous tipping points that set this country off around issues around police reform and police brutality. Following the death of Michael Brown, President Obama appointed myself and 10 other people to what he referred to as Obama's 21st Century Task Force. That report is still online under that name. Anyone can pull it up, 21st Century Task Force report. But he gave us 60 days to deliver a document to him that would advance policing in this country and would also help build relationships. Myself and my other 10 colleagues, we traveled across the country, talking to those in the clergy community and religious community, talking to those in the civil rights, human rights community, police unions, you name it. We took statements from thousands of people, of course, not just the 11 of us, because we had a whole staff from the White House that was assigned to us. But at the end, on March 2nd, 2015, we delivered to the President of the United States at that time, Barack Obama, a document that had 6 pillars outlining in each one of those pillars, how do we build relationships? The first pillar was building trust and legitimacy. And the last pillar was officer wellness. But in between there were other ideals that we came up with that were so significant in order to begin to advance policing in this country and to build relationships in a way that would be viable to communities and very much to communities of color. If you recognize today, body-worn cameras are very much a part of a police officer's uniform today. Well, those body-worn cameras were born out of those recommendations that we delivered to President Obama in 2015. So subsequent to all of that, you have a new administration come in. And under the current administration, Jeff Sessions was appointed U.S. attorney. They took that document and they deep-sixed it, meaning that they set it aside. And here we are 3 years later to the date, and we have nothing, absolutely nothing, that provides us with a roadmap and nothing that advances policing in the way that that document did. But the document is still there. And there are many police departments across this country that still lean to it, and some have not. But it is viable. It is a roadmap. It's a GPS system that allows us to look in it. And there's a variety of ways in which we can build relationships, maintain those relationships. And unfortunately, as a result of a new administration who certainly have the prerogative to do as they choose, they deep-six that document. And right now we're trying to figure out in this country, where do we pick up? Because on May 25th, just a few days ago, we watched a man murdered on television in this country and around the world. And now we're trying to figure out, what do we do? And you know what? And I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna end. I had a couple of young men come up to me and they said, Dr. Alexander, I did everything you told me to do. Put my hands on the steering wheel, comply, be respectful. I did all those things. And even after me doing all of those things, I still get choked to death in the middle of the street in front of witnesses with police officers who showed no compassion and no moral compass. And I get shot in the middle of the night in Louisville, Kentucky, on a no-knock warrant that probably should have never been issued. And if that is not enough, there's Mr. Albury in South Georgia, who was run down by 2 men in a truck and killed in the middle of the street that we all watched. So I did everything you asked me to do, Dr. Alexander, and I don't know what else to do. And that is the $50,000 question. What do we do? Where do we pick up? But we know this, we got to do something, and we got to remain hopeful.
So thank you for that response. And I'll come back to you here shortly. I do have some follow-up for you, but I want to involve everybody in this conversation. Pastor Ellis, we know that even as far as back as the civil rights era, that the Black church has been the pillar of our community in all aspects. But during this time of civil unrest, I've had phone calls, I've had conversations with different people that want to know my perspective, but more often they want to express their frustration. And one of the recurring things that I'm hearing, particularly from Christians, is these words. I'm tired of praying. I'm tired of turning the other cheek. I want justice. I want justice now. What is your message to that? How do you approach when you have a group of people that feel that they're at their wits' end and they're tired of doing everything that we as Christians embody? What's your response to that?
Well, as a pastor, you know, we have a responsibility to provide pastoral or what we call shepherding care for the people. So empathy is the first thing. You've got to identify where the people are at. You move to with compassion. And then you have to move from the place of compassion to insight and understanding of the root of the problem. In order to understand what justice is, you have to understand the root of the injustice. Sometimes we'll think it's just the act itself, but what is the root behind it? Spiritually, right? Behaviorally, systemically, institutionally. So when you talk about justice, justice is not just a law passed, not just a policy changed. You have to look at it from a panoramic perspective. And that requires thought leaders at the table. You've got to have more than just one perspective. And again, we know in our communities, we have struggled in times past of coming together and staying together. Coming together is the beginning of progress, right? Staying together is progress. Working together is success. And we've yet to figure that out. So pastors have to yet keep praying because our boss is the Almighty God. And prayer is the foundation for God's insight, God's truth, God's perspective on the root of the problem. And so it goes from prayer to preparation, to protest, to petitions, to policy changing, to people at the polls, to positivity, to patience. It's a process, and we can talk further about that. But you want to share empathy, and you've got to inform the people that the root to injustice is not as simply as it looks. And again, you don't want to take a Band-Aid approach, but you want to do something. So we definitely feel that. And many pastors have never been trained in how to do real civil rights work. They've not had a true mentor or how to advocate for justice. But this is where the opportunity to learn comes in. When we see these injustices, it's time for all of us to prepare, myself included.
Good. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Ms. Henderson, to you. From watching the protests that's been covered on national media, one thing that stood out to me is the amount of young people that's participating in the protest around the country. It seems more now than we saw in the 2015, 16, even 2014 protest. What role does the younger generation play in this movement? And how can we ensure that that energy is sustained and not something that's here today and gone tomorrow?
I think the young people play an important role. When you look, I think that the statement that you hear a lot now is we're not our ancestors, right? We have a young generation now they're also sick and tired, right? I think we can go through and kind of say how all of our generations have had their layers of we're tired and we're sick and tired. But I think our young people have experienced and grown into a place where they're not comfortable, where they realize that something's wrong. And that form of frustration has gone beyond we will silently take or accept. I think now they're ready to stand up and fight. And I think social media has a strong piece in that. When you see over and over and over people that look like you, people that look like your family members, people that could definitely be your family members, people that are your family members constantly, being attacked, right? Killed by police, ignored, right? It's only, it come to a point where it's like, we're tired of this. And history has shown us that when our ancestors and when our parents were going through these problems, that it doesn't seem like anything changes. Explain to me why, when something happens to someone of color, right, someone that looks like us, we have to go out and protest for something to happen. I have to go out and protest and yell and scream for someone to be rightly charged for a crime that they've committed. But when we sit back, and sometimes we can see that others don't get treated the same. We've watched men who killed people be walked into what, McDonald's, Burger King for a meal. You know, some folks are getting water bottles to drink water, but our people have to watch as they're being flung in the streets, knees on necks, shot in cars, shot, period, disrespected, knocked down. And it's almost like, why is it that we have to fight for the same justice that we're allowed, that we're supposed to have, and that we see others receive completely differently? So I think in order for us, our young people, to stay engaged, I don't think that's going to be a problem for our young people to stay engaged. And I think that you will see change at the polls. But what I would caution folks is not to just assume that the young people will just fall into this a particular party and fall behind a particular person just because that's the way things seem to go. Our young people now are saying we want more than just falling in line with people that make promises and we don't see change.
Good. So when you say they won't fall into a particular party, or they won't automatically fall behind a particular candidate, is there some demands that we're seeing from our younger generation? Is it certain things that they're putting on the table and asking for?
I mean, I think our young people are asking for the same thing we all are asking for, right? We want to see policy change. We want to see what's going on with how the police are working with community. We want economic change, right? We want to see growth. We want to see jobs in our communities. We want opportunities. We don't want to be ignored. And we want to actually talk to people that understand us and then don't make promises and we don't see anything happen, because we've grown up seeing this. And it's discouraging. It's discouraging. And I think there's definitely a movement of, we're just not going to fall in line, because falling in line hasn't brought change to our communities.
Gotcha. Dr. Alexander, what is your message to that generation? Not only the community members, but the younger officers. All right.
Well,
go ahead.
Yes, sir. We have a younger generation who sees the world a lot different than many of us. I'm a baby boomer. I'm from that generation. And then, of course, you have Generation Xers that are closer to me. And the things that we value and how we see the world, have experienced the world, is much different than what young people do today. And quite frankly, they, in many ways, see that we have failed them. And in many ways, we have. And in many ways, we have not followed through on a lot of things. And young people will tell us we have been too patient. And if you look out there now in streets across this country, tonight, many of the protesters who are protesting peacefully are young people from a variety of different populations and backgrounds. And they have a different experience in viewing the world. And young African-American men and women, of course, have a very different view too. They don't want to wait for change. And for them, enough's enough. And that's what you hear going on in this country today. Enough is enough. No more preaching. We have to continue to pray. As we heard the clergy say tonight, we got to continue to pray. That is a given. But we got to create some new action, because it's the action is what's going to get us where we need to be. I don't know what the answer is, but I know we got to do something very different. And if you look across this country now, for 10 nights in a row, this country has been protesting the death of George Floyd for 10 nights in a row. That has never happened that I'm aware of. And the numbers are growing bigger every night, but not just growing in this country, they're growing in Europe and in Asia and all around the globe. People are standing up for us, standing up for what's right, and they're young people. And what they're saying is, no more all of this waiting and turning the cheek. We want something done now. And this is an opportunity for us as a nation to begin to do something different in a nonviolent way, because being violent, tearing up property, that is not acceptable. And no one is going to listen to you when you're screaming at the top of your voice. You chant loud as you can. You stomp in the streets as loud as you can. But when we get to the table, we need to have some ideas and be very thoughtful and planful. I admire the young people that are out there today. They're so much more culturally aware, so much more sensitive. They're technologically intuitive, because that's their background, that's their nature, that's what they grew up with. And they have a lot to offer us, because people like myself and others, we're growing older, and it's time for us to move out of the way, share our wisdom and knowledge with them, but let them be the new activists. We can't go to the grave trying to be the activists. These kids got a different idea of how they want to live in this world. And I'm ready for them to take the helm, because they're smart, they're intuitive, and they have courage. And even though sometimes we come down on millennials this, millennials that, let me tell you something. Every generation always got something to say about the generation that's coming up behind them. That is not new. But I think for the young people that may be listening tonight, I will say to you, stand up, take part, march, and make your voice heard and be active. And yes, be tired of waiting, because when a man get killed in the middle of the street in broad daylight by 4 men, and people in that community stand there and say to the officers, let him breathe. In the last breath that he take, he cries for his mama. And we all watched it. We all felt it. And people right now are very angry. They're very sad. And they're very fearful. And people of color are very fearful. And myself, and I know my good friend there, James Jefferson, we're law enforcement folks. And that's the last thing we want, is for people to be afraid of us. We want people to see us as someone that's there to help them and to get them from hurt to a place of comfort. That's what we're doing. That's what we were sworn to do. But what we saw exercised on May 25th, and many incidents, even before Michael Brown and after Michael Brown, we're tired. People are fed up, and we want action. No more talking. No more all that jumping up and down. People want something done. And if you're not willing to do something, then get out of the way and let these young people do their thing, because they got a lot to say. They got good leadership skills. And if they want our wisdom, we're there to give it to them. And if they don't want it, I'm still going to be on the sideline over there in case they change their mind, because I'm not going to take it personally when they tell me to get out of the way, because it ain't personal. It ain't about my feelings. It's about where they're trying to take their destiny. We're on our way out. They're on their way in. So this is going to be their world, and they're going to live in it beyond us. They're going to raise children in it beyond us. And so we selfishly need to get out of their way and let them do their thing, because we got some great, smart, beautiful young men and women out there who are doing a great job tonight, making their voices heard.
Thank you, Dr. Alexander. Pastor Ellis, I think we both can agree that our mayor, Mayor Broom, and our chief of police, Chief Murphy Paul, has done a good job, and their heart is pure and in the right direction, and they are community-oriented people. And the statistics show, and I'll get into it before we conclude tonight, but what should be our message to them from a church perspective? Although we see them doing, good work in the community and putting their best foot forward and doing and saying the right things, what should be our message to them?
Well, it always starts with encouragement. The behavior you recognize and rewards gets repeated. And then secondly, many times when you're on the inside of leadership and you focus creates blindness. You have blind spots. Creativity is the search for options. Focus is the elimination of them. When you focus, you don't see what you don't see. So being more inclusive, asking for perspective, bringing more thought leaders at the table. And that takes time. Remember, crisis comes from a Greek word which means turning point. When a crisis occurs, it's to turn you in a different direction. And sometimes we miss the opportunity in crisis because we just immediately try to put it out like it's a fire. But the crisis is telling you something needs to change. And if something is to change, right, then the discipline we practice daily has to change because everybody gets in a routine. And how do I break that routine? Is there enough pain for me to break the routine? And again, is the return worth the effort? That has to be on the table as well. Is this worth the effort for me to break my routine? Or do I just give a political speech or appease the people, right, with the soundtrack and then go back to my routine? We all have to be agitated enough to break our routine. Anger is the birthplace for solutions. This is why Jesus would say, be angry, but sin not. Because if you sin, you miss the solution because you've misappropriated your anger. You miss the opportunity to find the solution. This is why it says be angry, but don't sin, because anger is actually birthing something if you process it properly. This is why wisdom comes in that, right? And that's so important as well. That's why we all need it around us. We need wisdom. And watch this. I'll close with this. I've often said, your goals decide your mentors. So when someone tells me, this is my goal, this is what I'm trying to do, that's going to tell me who your mentors are. You don't just arbitrarily choose your mentors and then find you some goals. No, once I understand your goals, then I'll understand who you bring into the table. And so that's why protest has to lead to some goals. And that's when, as Dr. Alexander talked about, that's when hopefully, right, even the young protesters who have raw energy and emotion, and we know we want change, we don't quite know what it should look like. You got to now, again, begin to process, what is my anger telling me? What education do I need to add to perhaps the canvas of my imagination? And then who do I need to bring to the table? Mentors. That's the wisdom in the struggle.
That's good. That's good. Ms. Christine, as they both spoke to particularly Dr. Alexander spoke to bridging the gap between the new generation and the old generation. I want to hear it from you. I know you're pretty involved with young people. How do we accomplish that without offending the older generation or dismissing the younger generation?
Well, I think one of the things that was mentioned is, let them lead. That's one, right? Let them lead. And I am here for you on the sidelines, but let us lead. It's our time. I don't think there's a difference in terms of, we're not angry at those before us, right? I think we just know that there's a different direction that young people want to take, because when we've watched how things have happened and we haven't seen change, then it's like, give us a chance to show you what our justice looks like. Emmett Till's mother left that coffin open for a reason. She wanted the world to see what happened to her child. She wanted the world to see her son and what they did to her. I think this is the place that we're at right now, right? Our young people are hitting up social media. They're out there organizing. They are reaching out to our elders. Elders are out there in the communities with them, marching with them, supporting them, but they're not taking the mic, you know, and I think the young people don't want to pass the mic. They want their voices to be heard. They don't want to be ignored. They want the support and the guidance, right? We've learned from those that have taught us before. We stand on the shoulders of those before us, right? But I think young people want to show that we are being affected. That when we see this, that's my brother, that's my cousin, that's my father, and it's so difficult because when we kneel, they had a problem with it, right? That was quietly trying to protest. It raised arms. When we go outside and we protest, they have a problem with that. So, you know, I think we've embraced, we don't care if you're uncomfortable. We've been uncomfortable for years. Our families, our generations have been uncomfortable. And I think as long as we can move together in this movement, allowing young people to have a voice, allowing young people to take the lead and to take charge, and for our elders to stay with us and be with us, stand with us. That's all we can ask, because this is a fight that I don't see young people stopping. There's a new movement. There's a new thought process. It's a new energy, and it has to be embraced. And I think they're going to embrace it with or without support. But obviously, we would want the support.
And can I add one thing?
Please, please.
You know, it's one piece that we totally overlooked, I think, is if you look across the country tonight and around the world, how are all those people able to be in different locations at the same time? Via social media. That is one of the most incredible inventions in the 20th century, because it brings people together. And right now, one of the biggest challenges around protests is that you take any city, any major city, you go downtown in Atlanta, there's a large group of people, but yet you're trying to manage another large group of people out in Gwinnett County, or another large group of people out in Cobb County, or another large people. And quite frankly, police doesn't have enough resources. So it gets spread it thin. But when people march, and I'm talking about the peaceful protesters, first of all, let me be clear about that. But when people march, they are able to coordinate. They're able to get together. Back in my day, you had to get on the telephone or go put up a sticker on the light pole or something. And, hey, we all going to meet at the church at 7 o'clock and have a rally. No. They got a whole different way of communicating. They can pull 100,000 people together just in a matter of seconds. And that's what you're seeing taking place now. Is social media is playing such a tremendous and huge role in social change. And they're able to rally, they're able to communicate, and they're able to get their messaging out. And I just think we live in we do live in a very, very different time. And it's very interesting to watch this young generation in terms of their energy and their passion. And they understand racism. They have been victims of it as well. Women have been victims of sexism. And these young people have been victims of homophobia and xenophobia. And they know what it feels like, but they're going to do something about it. And they got a lot of allies out there from all different parts of the community. A lot.
Brother James, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Jeff, I want to ask Ms. Henderson a question to get clarity to even our audience. I'm in my late 40s, so I don't consider myself old. I don't consider myself too young. So I'm kind of right in the middle with mixed emotions all the time. I heard you use the word they. You know, when we do this, they do this. Define how the young people define they from your perspective. You know, just the anecdotal story, perhaps. Is they a who or they a what?
I I think they are whom. It's policymakers that don't listen, that don't care. It's the police in the community that are not community policing, right? The police that don't necessarily care. It's the people that don't have empathy, right? When you have empathy, it's not the same as you having sympathy for me. I want you to understand my plight. I want you to understand my struggle. I want you to understand my pain. And I think we've come across a point where it almost feels like either you understand us or you're the other person that's oppressing us, that won't hear us. And I guess that's when we say they, I think we're looking at it from a different lens. It's those that don't seem to want to meet us halfway, those that seem to feel okay with ignoring us, brushing us off, and just kind of minimizing who we are, minimizing what the things that matter to us.
Do you think that your clarity with policymakers, the police that don't care, do you think that needs to be projected more so you know how to attack the target? Because sometimes when people are enraged, they who they is becomes unclear because you're angry. I think it needs to be clear, because if I'm to attack policymakers, which you're dead on, right? I need to understand something about policy, how they get elected, how they are appointed, how to protest, how to hold them accountable, same as police officers. So I think, man, part of heightening, our strategy, our working together, to achieve incredible outcomes, defining they, so people don't turn this just into, a race war. Because if you say they, some people may think it's just all white people, or it's all older white people, and you got people all around the world. So some people are saying, hey, it's not me. I think clarity there, and then starting to attack it with think tanks, creates systemic and sustainable change.
I agree. And when the young people out there protesting, I'm pretty sure that they are very clear on who they are talking to and talking about. But I think also when it's time to sit down and have those conversations, right? Because after all this, there has to be conversations, there has to be dialogue. There's time there's time for us to be strategic. Then we start talking about who our stakeholders are, who our targets may be when we're trying to address these certain issues. And yes, I think we're definitely we need to be clear. I think we are clear. And I think moving forward that we will continue to heighten that and to speak. I don't think people are necessarily hiding who they are upset with at this moment.
Yeah. Good.
I want to touch on one thing real quick, and we're going to open it up for questions the last 10, 15 minutes or so. Dr. Alexander, can you speak to this whole idea of diversity in the police department? I hear it all the time, how important it is to have a diverse police department. And I think we get caught up when we hear that word diversity in merely the race of the person. And I'm of the opinion that, to me, diversity first starts with your mental. How do you think? I would much rather a Caucasian brother with a right mentality compared to an African-American officer who don't have that, right? So to me, diversity starts with the thinking first, not just the race. Give me your thoughts on diversity and how that relates to law enforcement from your perspective.
So in terms of race, and in terms of gender, in terms of the obvious, race and gender, which is the obvious, you can look at someone and tell whether they're from different culture than yourself, and generally whether they're male or female. But those are the obvious, right? So when I think about gender today, I think not gender, but when I think about diversity today, I think about it in a very broad way, because today we have people who have a variety of sexual orientations, whether they be lesbian or gay or transsexual, whether they be Catholic or Jewish or Baptist, or whether they be black or white or Asian, or whatever the case may happen to be. All of that is diversity. And it's very important that any police department, anyone who serves people in government or even in industry, it is important that we understand the importance of diversity, because with diversity is strength. But if you speak specifically to police departments, because we always hear, well, we want more black officers, we want more female officers, we want more Asian, Hispanic officers in our communities. And yes, we do, because diversity is great. But what you also want is a diversity of thought. You want a diversity of thought, because here's a news flash for us. All black folks ain't the same. And all white folks ain't the same. Right. All black folks didn't come from the same place in this country. We had a variety of different experiences. And if you look at our younger generation of millennials today, they have had friends that I didn't know I had until I was 40 years old. I didn't know I had a gay friend until I was 40 years old. Today, our children or grandchildren are going to school with kids who are openly being whatever they want to be. So by the time they get to be young people and young adults, being around diverse populations, being sensitive to people with a variety of different sexual orientations or religious orientations and from different parts of the world in the country, they're much more sensitive, they're much more aware, they're much more astute. And even if they live in the heart of an urban community and all they do is see people look like them every day, or they live out in some rural part of Kentucky, one thing that kids are able to do today that I wasn't able to do and many generations weren't able to do was that they can now virtually have friends that are different than them through social media. And they have friends that they meet from all over the world, but I've never left off of Main Street, wherever, right? So when we think about diversity, yes, we want diversity in our departments. We want young people who have been exposed to differences. We want young people who are sensitive to differences. Those 4 men that we saw that killed George Floyd, those guys were different. There was one that looked like he could have been a mixed race. There was another one that appeared to be of Asian descent. And there were 2 there was white. You had diversity there. But they killed him. So this was not about diversity. What this was about, a police department that hired people that have no moral compass, that hired people that have no compassion and no sense of humanity and respect for humanity. And they come in all sizes, shapes, and colors. And one of the things that has to be part of police reform in this country is not just training them, but who is it that we are hiring? Because I need to know more than just your driving record, your credit history, and your criminal history. I need to know who you are. What's your orientation to people that are different than you? What's your orientation to diversity? How do you demonstrate that? How can you demonstrate that in an interview? How do we see a demonstration of that in your background? Because if any of those 4 men had any kind of moral compass, they would have told Siobhan, let him breathe. But they couldn't. But here's a bigger issue when you talk about diversity inside police departments. What they demonstrated on that day suggests to me that they got deeper systemic problems inside the Minneapolis Police Department. Because how does an agency hold those types of attitudes and people with that type of moral compass, which they don't have? How does an organization hold them in place? Something inside that larger organization is dysfunctional. And what I have been encouraged on over the last few days is that chiefs and sheriffs across this country is that we look inside of our organizations and take a real assessment about who is it that we have in there and what our message need to be going forward. Because this, what we saw happen on May 25th should never happen again. What we saw happen prior to were people who have been innocently killed by law enforcement. We got to find a way to stop that. But some of this, we got to look at the people that we're hiring. And then we got to look at how we're training them. And then we have to look at how we're supervising them. Because I can get a good kid, a great kid, come into the academy, does a great job, get assigned to a precinct station. But if he or she doesn't have good supervision, that's role modeling the type of behavior that we want, then what you're going to have is failure. And when you have that and it becomes widespread, then you have a system that is dysfunctional. And you have a tree that bears bad fruit. It's just not a couple of bad people that's in that department. The whole department is infected. And sometimes they don't know that they are. But a healthy department will get folks out so that everybody else can stay healthy. So diversity is important, but we need to be clear and understand that everybody is not the same. There were potentially 2 people of color out there on that day from the pictures we saw of them. Didn't make a difference. Didn't make a difference whatsoever. It's what's in your heart, and it's what sense of humanity. Because I can't teach you a moral compass. I can't teach you compassion, and I can't teach you morality. You have to come with that before you ever step inside any police department anywhere. And if you don't come with that, then I promise you, you're going to fail. And the whole agency is going to fail as a result of it. So we got to do better.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your honesty and your feedback on that. Dr. Christy Perry, if you can come back and join us, we'll entertain at least 2 questions, and we'll let Pastor Ellis close it out, speaking to the event on Saturday.
Absolutely. We have a question from Keosha James. Thank you, Keosha, for sending in that question. The question is, what are your thoughts on community policing? And I think I can give that to anybody who wants to answer that. Thoughts on community, probably Dr. Alexander would be a great person to answer that.
Well, let's
hear from Ms. Henderson.
So, yeah.
Ms. Henderson, what do you when you hear community policing, what does that look like to you?
I think that looks like, having officers that are from the community, that understand you, that know your neighbors, that knows the history of your community. I just wanted to piggyback. I think when we were talking about diversity, there was one other piece that I think is important. It's about cultural education. And when you're training officers, they're working in the community, and there's historical trauma within those communities that has happened, and history that continues to affect those that live in that community on this, to this present day. And so when you're talking about community policing, it's being able to understand the community you're working in. It's being able to see that we need to sit down and work together with the community to figure out how we can create policies and programs that can help benefit the community and support the community outside of just ways to just arrest people. I think when there's community policing, there's a little bit more devotion of caring about the people that you're there to protect and serve.
Thank you.
We have another question. The question comes from Shaq Harris. What can the church do to function as advocates for police reform? We'll give that to Pastor Ellis.
What can the church do to, you broke up there, to?
What can the church do to function as advocates for police reform?
A lot, right? It starts with, even if you're not educated, you may say I'm a small church and we don't have thought leaders or what have you. It's accountability. many times in our communities, we don't hold our elected officials accountable. And the wisdom is always in the question. So how do I ask good questions, right? Even if I don't know them, you can learn. That's where a mentor comes in. What are the accountability questions that we ask of our chief of police, our district attorney, our mayor? What is it that we want to know, right, and gain insight on? So now one question will lead to another question, right? And then as you embrace the community, pastors, as you build around your vision, you start developing intellectual capital. You bring a Christy Perry together and find out their expertise and say, hey, let's put together a Social Justice Institute to educate as we assess our community and understand the educational gaps and the deficiencies that may exist as we try and build for a more humane society, a more peaceful society, a more economic and balanced society, et cetera. You start partnering, right, together. So you understand, again, how do we move forward collectively? What does progress looks like? And then you start setting small milestones to gain success, because sometimes we shoot for something so big, we don't get it, and people become discouraged. They feel like nothing is going to change. It doesn't happen overnight because the problem didn't get created overnight, if you will, right? So that's important. And I think for churches too, let's stick with biblical principles that are sustainable over time. Stay in Solomon's writing if you want to understand the basics of life. Dr. Alexander was talking earlier about being fruitful. In order to be fruitful, you got to be seedful. And even if you're not fruitful, let's say you're a young officer and you hadn't been trained, and they ain't paying a whole lot to these officers. So these guys are not coming from being traveled all over, guys and gals, and been experienced. So how do I get that? So if I got a young, raw conduit and I want you to embrace a community that doesn't look like you and comes with different experiences, I got to put seed in you. Seedful. Now you become fruitful. See, seed produces after its own kind. And so some of these seeds we see are tied to a system. And that system is producing the seed. And that seed is producing the fruit. So you can't just attack the seed. You got to get to the root. The root determines the fruit. Jesus taught us that principle. He says, hey, I'm the vine, you're the branches. Stay in me, you're going to bear much fruit. So when we look at evil, we got to understand, where is the vine? Who are the branches? This is the fruit. It's a principle. And so more of that needs to be taught as we advocate for education, wisdom. Now we embrace strategy. Now we raise up our own politicians and leaders. We have a pipeline, just like in corporate America. We had a pipeline for next generation VPs, a pipeline for who's in that grid box to be the next president. We've got to do the same thing. If we want the dream that America has promised, and that this capitalist society has promised us, where industry and trade is controlled by private citizenship, not the government. So when you understand that by your sheer birthright of being born in America, you have a right to create wealth, to own land, and create generational wealth. What does the strategy look like to produce that? Right? That seedful thinking, and now we get fruit from it. The church has to embrace that message.
Thank you, Pastor Krista. We got 1 minute left. We're going to let Pastor Ellis close out with speaking to Saturday.
I just want to say to the panelists, your diverse thinking, man, it's appreciated. Thank you for sharing with the audience, and the audience who asked questions. I applaud you, and to Brother James being the moderator. Thank you for your leadership. You are a model, and your service to our community. I can only imagine what it's like being in your shoes, and that sometimes perhaps the anxiety, the uncertainty, the fear, and yet you got to go home to your family. We are praying for you. We are praying for peace because we know that there's darkness in the world, and that darkness starts with the spirit. And we who are spiritual have to understand the root of this problem. There are lunatics. There are people with mental illness. You can be an innocent person, and because of their rage and what's being incited, they take an innocent person's life. So we're praying for the protection of all of our citizens during this time. You know, the Bible says in Ephesians 5:11, do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. And that's what we have to, those who have the light must be looking for where there is unfruitful deeds of darkness and exposing it. So Saturday, we're gathering, we're asking 1,000 men, especially men of color, to gather in black on the state capitol. We're having a rally. That rally will involve, again, prayer, different versions of prayer or prayer targets for courage, for direction, for wisdom. It will also involve motivational speakers from our millennials who will speak to us from their heart as they see a more promising future. It will involve the leaders, the voice of leadership today, thought leaders from the medical community. Our Black doctors will speak. We'll have our judges there, all 3-minute excerpts. And then we will read off a statement of demand to our Louisiana State Attorney General and the Justice Department. We're going to ask our governor to be a champion, even though we know he cannot sign an executive order. We're going to call him to be a champion of the change that we're proposing. And so we're asking for, again, I won't go into all of it. We have a statement that I've got with our lawyers. We've reviewed it. I've even had a judge look at it. And we feel we can get this legislation, we can get these behaviors and policies passed to, again, help with the policing of our law enforcement officers in our community. We're going to share that publicly. We're asking the press to come out, people to come out. And then we're going to give the whole entire community a call to action, where there's steps of what we want them to do. We've created a petition. We want 1 million people in the state of Louisiana to sign this petition. And then we know many times at gatherings, people will gather and they'll be excited, but there's no follow-up. We're stating that in 30 days or so, we will gather back at the state capitol to inform the press and the public of what the response is and or the lack thereof from our Attorney General and our governor. And then at that moment, we will state what our next action is in confrontation to the opposing forces of sustainable change. We will ask our community to engage in actions such as calling the state's Attorney General office and stating what we want, the change we want to see. We're going to ask, again, people to participate in the census. Make sure you're counted and you're connected. Make sure you're registered to vote. Stay educated and partner. So we got a call to action over the next 30 days before we gather back. And we're going to push this thing through and inform our public and community on what's next.
Thank you. Krista, you can close it out.
That's it. Thank you all for joining us again on this Thursday night. Hope to see you all on Saturday. Remember, as Pastor Ellis said, come to the state capitol on Saturday at 12 o'clock noon. Men, wear your black. Women, you can join us as well. Bring your sons, bring your uncles, bring your husbands, and come out on Saturday. Once again, thanks to our panelists, thanks to our moderator, and we'll see you on Saturday. Have a good night.
Good night.